ledningens huvudsakliga redskap som ska säga var ska vi vara och hur ska vi jobba i framtiden och vad kräver det då att vi gör för prioriteringar vad gäller IT-projekt som vi ska göra eller verksamhetsutvecklingsprojekt då. För jag är en sån här som tycker att digitalisering är ju inte IT-utveckling utan det är ju verksamhetsutveckling. Det är liksom mitt mantra i det.
Nu kommer vi komma in på massa käpphästar här. Liksom.
Har vi parkerat den frågan?
Ja, redan med en gång får vi parkera den, för där ska jag gå igång.
Ja, okej, vad härligt.
Ja, men det är ju Henriks expertis här, så det här kommer nu bli en intressant diskussion tror jag. Men jag vill bara förstå, vad betyder egentligen portföljtanken? Jag har lite svårt att förstå den riktigt.
Nej, men vad det handlar om är att du samlar samla ihop en mängd olika utvecklingsinsatser som du vill göra. Och sen är det ju som så här att du har ju en begränsad mängd personal och resurser som du kan förfoga över. Så du måste ju liksom bestämma dig, vad är det vi ska göra för någonting här? Och då tar varje liksom underportfölj då, till exempel inom utbildning, ta fram en roadmap över vad är det vi behöver göra för olika saker över tid så att man inte gör allting samtidigt och så att man optimerar den tillgängliga personalen man har inom ramen för det här. Och så skickar man upp det till den centrala portföljstyrningen som får titta över helheten. För det finns ju mängder av projekt som så att säga påverkar både forskning och utbildning som man vill göra. Och då måste man synka där emellan vartannat. Och sen så då också följa upp det här att ge det någon effekt i verksamheten. Och kan man liksom jobba med och få ut den effekten. För ofta är det som så att man har liksom på IT-avdelningen investerar man pengar och så gör man saker och ting. Och sen så effekten kommer någon helt annanstans och det här ute i verksamheten man tjänar in stålarna man vill göra inom där och kan bli mer effektiv och så.
Ja, men det här, jag skrev ner det som en punkt som vi måste gå lite djupare på sen, men just det hur man planerar, man ska kalla det på olika abstraktionsnivåer. Det finns ju liksom en som är nere på enskilda team som kanske utvecklar någonting. Det kan vara inom finans eller det kan vara någon produktutveckling som sker eller utbildning eller vad som helst eller ett forskningsteam. Men sen vill man ju kunna planera på högre och högre nivåer på något sätt. Men sen finns det också den här frågan, ska allting vara 100% synkroniserat och samordnat? Eller ska man låta folk jobba lite mer autonomt? Om du förstår vad jag menar.
Jo, men jag förstår vad du menar. Men alltså, det är väl klart att du kan låta folk jobba på relativt autonomt i de olika sakerna. Men som vi också snackade om tidigare, att du behöver ju liksom medvetandegöra vad jobbar du med och vad gör de andra så att du vet om det finns beroenden.
Har vi 2 eller 3 olika projekt som egentligen försöker lösa samma sak som har kommit från lite olika håll?
Och framförallt som gör helt olika lösningar för samma sak.
Så vi har fått olika lösningar som går i olika tangenter som stökar till det för varandra.
Ja, men så kan det vara. Absolut.
Portföljstyrning.
Yes, and I think we should actually switch to English as well. We forgot that.
It's an English one. I thought I would write and ask you about it, but I didn't know that. So for sure we should.
Now you know.
Now I know. Good.
We just got caught up in a discussion here before, but okay, cool. But let's try to continue in English if that's okay. Okay.
That
also,
was
so you have
funny,
some kind
by
of. Yeah, we didn't think about that.
No, we didn't think about it at all.
Nobody said anything.
But I think another very amusing thing that you said when you came here was that you were actually in a meeting, and at the same time you were standing up here and just small talking with us, and at the same time you were in a meeting, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. But is that? What do you think about that? Can you actually do that these days, you think?
So I've actually studied this and experimented around this, and it started during the pandemic when we were facing situations that we got more and more meetings. Everybody wanted to have Teams or Zoom meetings at all times. So at one point I was actually called to 2 meetings at the same time, and they were extremely important. I had to be in both of them, they said. So I said, well, what the heck? I have 2 ears and I have 2 devices, so let's connect to both meetings, and one meeting in one ear and another meeting in the other ear. And to be fair to everybody, I also informed both meetings that I actually was in 2 meetings at the same time, and I just to avoid this effect of you have forgotten to unmute yourself. I said, well, when I'm muting my picture, I'm speaking in the other meeting, so that you know. So I did that, and afterwards I interviewed the participants of both meetings, a few selected ones from both meetings, and asked them, what did you feel about my participation and contribution in the meeting? And they said, well, you're just the way you usually are. and you actually, I thought it was amazing that you actually could take info from the other meeting you were in and bring it into our meetings, because they were about more or less the same things in this. And to me, this worked perfectly well. So I started experimenting around this and tried out this several times to see how it worked well. And amazingly enough, it actually worked quite well. And I could see that, for example, it enhanced my experience. If I could see that they had PowerPoints in one of the meetings, then it was easier to grasp it. I found that it was easier if both meetings were in the same language. So one Swedish and one English meeting were a bit more.
The brain then becomes.
Yeah, I didn't become as hot in my brain than if I had it like that. And I also tried 3 meetings at one point, but that was simply too stressful to do. And
for me, it sounds really, really hard. I mean, for me to just listen to 2 people speaking at once. I know my girlfriend, for example, she can speak with her friend at the same time, and they speak and listen at the same time. And I can't really do that. I say, please stop talking. One person should speak at one point in time, otherwise you can't follow it. But some people can. Some people seems to have the ability to have this kind of ability to just do 2 things at once. Perhaps you have that strength.
Well, I mean, I've been looking into what they say about cognitive psychology on these things, and what the neuro people are saying at Karolinska, for example, that you cannot do 2 things at the same time in this. So clearly, it's the fact that your girlfriend is better at this than you are. It's not a gender thing. It's simply a matter of training and concentration, I would say, in that sense. So I think that the human ability is basically the same. We can only perceive one thing at the time, but what you train is you train your ability to do task switching, to jump from one meeting to the other, and you train how you listen sometimes there, and you sample from that, and you sample from that, and so forth. And if you're good at that, you can do that without the other one noticing that you're actually listening to something else at the same time.
I'm caught up how I can prove that works. Have you ever watched 2 movies at the same time?
No.
Or you watch a movie and I want to follow this news, and then you sip this. I think this is in your brain what you're doing in the meetings. Yeah. You're zapping between 2 channels.
I've tried this actually, but I didn't think about it in this context. But I haven't watched 2 movies at the same time. But I've been watching a movie because my wife wanted to watch a movie. But on my telephone, I had an ongoing football game that I was interested in following, and that wasn't a big problem because whenever there's something interesting happening in the football game, they do a reshot of that afterwards, and you can actually follow what's happening.
And maybe that's more accurate, because to have 2 movies you've never seen, it doesn't work. But typically we're watching a movie and it's okay, we're doing it in the family. But I really want to look at the next new snowboard binding on YouTube.
Exactly.
And then you can sort of watch with one eye. And I think to some degree you follow the general story. Obviously, you're not really interested fully in the movie, because if you get immersed in the movie, then you're gone into that.
But I mean, cognitive psychologists have actually done experiments around this, which I think is quite fascinating. I mean, if you think about the Kahneman, the guy who won Nobel Prize, and his book on thinking fast and slow, and he's talking about different levels of information processing on this. So you could sort of have things that you need your full mental capacity to understand and grasp, and those are typically things like reading and understanding a text, or making a decision, or making an arithmetic calculation. These are things that require your full consciousness when you're doing
Level
that.
2, yeah.
But then there's a number of things that you do automatically without sort of the awareness being fully involved in that. So they've made experiments on this, and one experiment that I usually do on my students as well is I ask them to calculate backwards in steps of 3 from 2000, like 2000, 1997, 1994, 1991, and so forth. And then just to be able to calculate that, you sort of block that high level. And then you show them different things and ask them what they remember. So if you have written text, they don't grasp that. But if you have like colors, or if you have moving items or different things that are happening, they actually capture that. It's like another thing I do with my students, or did when we used to read newspapers. I asked them if they could tell me about an article they read in the newspaper. And people will say, yeah, I read this article about Putin and what he's doing now. And then I ask them, do you remember if it was on the left-hand side or right-hand side? And they could always answer that. Was it a picture in it? Was it a big article, small? Exactly. What did it look like? So all the spatial information around it, you take in automatically.
Visual and spatial.
Yeah,
visual and spatial.
And colors and movements and stuff like that, you can sort of process that automatically. But the thing of reading text and understanding that, you cannot do automatically. So what you do when you watch 2 movies is that you maybe from time to time your focus is on one movie, but if you have an action sequence where they're fighting on the other one, you're actually grasping a lot of the things that are happening there, even if you put your focus on the dialogue in the other one.
So can you speak about Kahneman, terms here, saying fast and slow, and perhaps you have the type 1 being more unconscious, like if you drive the car every day, I mean, you don't really think about it consciously, you just do it in some way.
Yeah.
But other things like calculating backwards is really hard.
And
it requires your conscious type 2 thinking to really kick in.
Yeah, exactly.
So is it what you're saying is basically that you can do at least those 2 different things at the same time, but it's hard to do both 2 type 2 things if you
no, I mean the type 2 things. There's sort of no known capacity limitations, so you could do many different things at the same time. So, for example, I'm driving my car this morning. I drove my car to the railway station in Uppsala, where I live. I have different tracks I could take to go to the railway station. And I don't really remember which one I took.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean that I'm a dangerous driver, because if a football comes bouncing out between cars there, I sort of alert the high level of that. Now it's time to sort of react and do things.
So you can kick in when
but I perceive everything that is happening. I perceive what the weather is like, if it's raining. I perceive sort of many different aspects of this journey, but I don't remember which route I took. And that's kind of fascinating, I think, to think about in retrospect.
But you said you actually been taking some of these experiments that you highlighted on how to do different meetings into an article you've been working on.
Yeah. Yes.
So how does it fit? What's the whole article about, and how does this context fit into the article?
So the article, it's almost past all of the review stages now, and I've done it together with 2 of my colleagues, Joachim Liljesköld and Stefan Stenbom at KTH. And what we wanted to do was that we wanted to sort of understand how the pandemic influenced us at the university. So we wanted to distinguish different phases of development. So we called the article the new normal. Because, and I'll explain what the new normal is in that sense, but that's sort of the 5th of the 5 phases that we distinguished in that. So the first phase that we could see is what we call the pre-pandemic phase. You remember what we used to work, how we used to work before the pandemic. And basically, even at my university, we had the situation where nobody could start a video meeting without asking the professional secretary to launch the meeting. That's the pre-pandemic.
Oh my God.
And actually, I got an assignment from one of my bosses that I should look into more usable tools for starting video meetings on that. But when the pandemic came, they actually you could see that they actually were quite competent to start their own meetings. They just had to learn this.
By necessity, you have to learn, and then you sort.
And the interesting thing was that this happened very quickly. I think it was a Thursday afternoon that we got a message from our boss saying that in 1 week's time from now, we will close the university and you have to do everything remotely. And actually, Monday morning, everything was done remotely. And that's phase 2. We call it then the emergency remote phase. So you pulled out, you put a lot of effort into sort of making everything work the way it should do.
You try to find what is the urgency gaps that where we have problems to fix.
I mean, what happened was that we focused on the teaching. We were saying that as a university, the single most important thing that needs to work is the teaching for our students. So if you have urgent research projects, you need to put them on hold so that at least you can see that the teaching works. And people put a lot of extra effort into that. And that phase actually didn't last long, because this was a phase where people put a lot of efforts into it, because we believed at that point that the pandemic would be over after Easter, because that was what Trump said.
I believe in Trump as well.
Yeah, exactly. But then we could then see the new phase happening, like the first summer, and we called that the new normal then, because then people started to talk about it, that maybe this is what the future will look like. We will work on distance all the time, and we can enjoy that in a good way. And I had personally really interesting experiences during the new normal phase, because my wife was complaining that I was getting a little bit fat, so I
think I gained 10 kilos just in Corona years.
Did you start doing meetings on the walk?
Yes, that's exactly what I did. So I had this, I bought a device, I should have brought it here, but that hangs the telephone in front of me like this.
That's so funny.
So I could do walking. It's bouncing a little bit, but it actually worked quite well. So I did.
Amazing.
I did 25,000 steps per day, 4 hours of meeting in walking.
And I had this conversation with my wife for the whole pandemic, and I didn't take one meeting at the call, and all my colleagues did it, and you're just stupid. And I said, yes, I am.
Yeah.
But you did it.
I did it. I thought it worked great. And actually, I've heard organizations now, like the Swedish Work Environment Authority, for example, they've actually been announcing that this meeting is a meeting you could take as a walking meeting. We recommend it. So it's sanctioned in a way from the leadership.
Back to the principles and rules of engagement, sort of thing. If that is clear, it's fantastic.
Exactly, but not everybody could do it that way. So I mean, there needs to be a minute taker that needs to sit in front of the computer. But then you can take turns on doing things such as that, and sometimes you simply had to say, well, I'm walking now. You need to send me an email about what I need to do as an action based on these things, and it worked fairly well, and people were happy about that. But then something strange happened, because when we were after the summer of the first pandemic year, you could sort of start feeling that because I should say that also I was facing that my working time during the emergency remote phase, I could group things into 3 different categories, about a third each. So the first third was sort of meetings that moved directly into Zoom, because that was the tool that we used, or Teams many times as well. The second category was meetings where they said that this is such an important meeting that we have a physical meeting, so we're going to postpone it. So then I got quite a bit of free time, so to speak. And then the third thing, which is the most interesting one, was meeting that they simply cancelled because of the pandemic, and they never came back. And you wondered,
were they really useful?
Yeah, why did I have them at all? But what happened then was that given the amount of meeting kept on increasing. So by the end of the summer, it was impossible to get a call to somebody because everybody was in a Teams or Zoom meeting, and it tended to fill out. So from 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
I remember this, and it was back to back, and like, when do I go to the toilet? When
but
when I have some
exactly. But then people started.
In the toilet as well.
You did you?
Yes.
You muted the picture and you sort of
muted the picture, muted the sound until you're supposed to speak, and then it's echoing in the toilet.
Exactly.
Been there?
Yes, I've been caught, having meetings saying, "Are you in the toilet? You can hear the echo."
But virtual backgrounds work quite well for that. But the interesting thing there was that we our boss said that we can't continue like this because it's impossible. So they said that as a work environment action, we decide that you cannot have 1 hour meetings. You need to shorten the meetings to 45 hours so you get a bit of breaks.
And this is funny. At Scania, in Outlook, the calendar bookings went from 1 hour to 1 hour to 50 minutes. So when you booked the meeting in your calendar, it went to 50 minutes.
It went to 45 minutes with us. Yeah, but the interesting thing was that the secretary that books the meetings for the manager, simply to get all of the meetings in, your 45-minute meetings became back-to-back. So you got more meetings happening at the same time.
They hacked the system.
Yeah. So this was sort of completely unusable that this thing happened. So then we came to the last phase in this, because then sort of after the pandemic, when we first thought we would open up, there was sort of different views. As you remember, there were organizations like, wasn't there LinkedIn or somebody that said that or Twitter, that we're not supposed to have any offices at all. You could just continue from home. And at my university, they basically said that we want everybody to be back full time. We need to see you because we've lost so many good things during this period. So this new normal, which I claim then, is that we really need to think carefully and strategically what we want the new normal to be. Do we want it to be sort of a going back to what it was before the pandemic, or do we want it to be 100% digital? No, I think we should aim for what I call then the thoughtful blended phase, where we sort of will realize that hybrid is going to be the new normal, and that we design our meeting rooms, our digital and physical meeting rooms, to harmonize with this way of working, in a sense. And that's sort of the main message of this paper. And then we've looked at a lot of data on actually both the number of meetings, number of Zoom meetings that we have from this period. That
you could pull the stats out of the
system. Yeah, we have the stats. So it went from before the pandemic, we had like 1,000 hours a week of Zoom meetings, and then just a few months later, we had 150,000 hours of Zoom meetings per week. So it increased tremendously. And we could track the Wi-Fi usage at the campus. Then we could see and measure that together with each other. We could track the use of the learning management systems, and we could see a lot of quantitative data out of that. And the interesting thing is that there's similar research that Microsoft has done on the use of Teams. So they've actually calculated what contribution this has to the carbon footprint in terms of how much time you save by sort of not commuting anymore, or they actually claim that the average length of meetings went from 35 minutes to 45 minutes instead during the first 7 months of the pandemic, that the number of emails increased with, I believe it was 150% or something like that during this period. So there's a lot of interesting data that you can look at and to study on that. And that's basically what we did.
Yeah, I remember you speaking about something else, and I think we should have a separate topic later, but the work environment obviously has been greatly influenced by the pandemic and really forced us to change. And not the least education in general. I think it was the Minister of Education in Sweden that said, that it's amazing how the pandemic were able to, in months, digitalize education compared to what we've been trying to do for years. I'm paraphrasing now, but still, if you really pushed to the wall, it's surprising how quickly you can transform, how you work, right?
It is.
Cool.
And I think it's interesting. A person at my job that says that I can't quote him on this, so I won't say who he was, but he said that if I knew that this was what it would take to make digitalization happen, I would have started a pandemic a long time ago.
Please quote him. I would love to. That was really a smart statement. No, but it's a bit sad that we need some kind of emergency for proper transformation to happen.
Yeah.
But it's the same in business or anything like that. If you don't have a burning pain, change is almost impossible.
No. Why waste a good crisis?
Why waste a good crisis is exactly what this is all about.
I hope we don't get to the conclusion that we need more crises. I think we had enough, But I thought, we had a pandemic,
But in some ways it's really sad, right? Because we have proven what we are able to do in terms of innovation speed, in what can sometimes be seen as old bureaucratic institutions or big old companies. And then when we come back to normal, like we for some reason it doesn't work. And I have some very beautiful examples of this also in Scania, how we had sort of very clear understanding for what we called was a golden arrow, something that needed to be fixed. If it was as simple as understanding the supply and demand or whatever reporting and whatever it was, and then people just come together, and then the right super team is put on the case, and we learn and we let them work on what they are supposed to do, and they can do it in days. And then we go back to something that, to realize what we did in days is years. And how can we not sort of figure this back into our operating model, so to speak, so we can be a little bit faster at least? It's interesting, isn't it?
It is. And I think that we're actually reflecting too little upon the ways in which we're working and living our lives. And there's so many things we can learn about this. And I actually made an interesting study at KTH also at the very end of the pandemic, before we started bringing people back, where I asked people how they perceive their homework environment. And interestingly enough, the how people perceive their work environment at home was had a direct correlation to the number of square meters they lived on. So
that's an interesting
so for sure, I mean, the youngest PhD students are those facing the biggest challenges. Those having people saying that, well, me and my boyfriend takes turn on who's to sit in the bathtub today when they're working. But also I gathered photographs, and I hope to be able to publish that at some point, but I need to ask permission from people. But I gathered photographs of different work situations. So I got 400 photographs of their home work situations.
So
I could
sent in the photographs of
they
how
submitted
they work from
them
home.
to me. Yeah, exactly.
Oh.
And I could see, and we then grouped these into categories. So we got sort of personas of types working at home. So either you could be the type of person that is the flexible one, that you have a laptop, you pack it up when you start working in the morning, and then you close it and put it away for lunch, and then you open it again. This was a clear category of people. We have these with trying to build sort of standing things where they put boxes or chairs on top of tables to get this working. We got a separate category of ironing board users that had. We even got one person that submitted that they had double ironing boards to get some depth into their. They
have the laptop on the ironing board.
Yeah,
to get to the right height.
To get to a standing thing. And then we had those that made professional ergonomic work environments at home, and we also had the sort of really professional ones that provided like lamps and good cameras to make good recordings and things on this. And then we also could distinguish the social category, those that even if it was a pandemic, they needed people around them to work. So they gathered 3 or 4 people together in one person's home and sat there and was working in the same room. So it was quite interesting and this we could tell only simply out of the pictures.
So different user personas and how we work at home.
Yeah. So what type of personas are you when you work at home?
Oh.
Are you the one lying in the sofa with your laptop in your knee? Or
Actually, yes. But I also sat in coffee shops and worked because I really enjoyed these social aspects of that.
Exactly.
We can go deep on this because on the one hand side, I'm the guy who can start up meetings when I'm still in bed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you can flip that to sitting in the
and even the toilet, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's yours, but no comments. And then in the sofa and all that. But then one thing I did was I actually sorted out a friggebord. And I built a very professional working space, 7.5 square meters, my little man cave.
Yeah.
And I actually did, I'm not going to go into detail, but I put some effort into building something which is a professional office.
So you went out there for your working hours and you avoided bringing your laptop back home.
I had to go to Dalarna to get a pair of classic clogs with,
Kurbits.
Kurbits. Yes, you know exactly what I was talking about.
I have them as well.
I get a pair of Kurbits clogs and then they're done to work in the snow, to my office.
Yeah.
So I went bananas.
Yeah.
Too many interesting topics here. We have forgotten an important part.
Introduce the guest.
We should. So, with that, very welcome here, Jan Gulliksen.
Yes.
It's actually very nice to have you here in real life for once. We've met each other a number of times, but usually in the last couple of years during remote meetings, then of course.
You look better in 3D.
Is that a compliment?
I must say you look fresh. You look fresher than a year back.
I have an AI enhanced version of myself. Virtually, I think I would look better.
Okay.
Who knows? Thanks for the compliment. But you've been doing so many things. You've been part of AI Sweden and Swedish AI agenda and so many other aspects. And actually, in my view, I think you're one of the most influential people when it comes to digitalization in Sweden. I mean, you are, for one, vice president of KTH, one of the best, if not the best, universities in Sweden. The best one is Linköping. And you're also professor of human-computer interactions, which is interesting and connected, of course, as well. You're also advising the Swedish government in matters of digitalization. And you're obviously conducting research, as we just heard now for a long time, in how to do work in a more digital environment, which I think we have so much to learn on in how to adapt to the situation that we have in this world. So too many interesting topics to speak about, but I hope we can go deeper into that soon. Yeah. But before we go there, perhaps you can just give a very, very brief introduction to who is Gulan.
It's the question of how brief you would want me to be then, but sometimes I actually like to start a bit early to explain how I could end up in this crazy situation that I'm in, because I started out being sort of very interested in schoolwork when I was really a kid. So I was extremely interested in mathematics early. So I remember that my mother and father was called to school when I went to third grade when I went to first grade, because I'd actually finished the mathematics books from third grade already, and they didn't know what to do with me at that stage. And so this interest in mathematics kept me going. So when I went in 8th grade, I started studying at the university. And when I went in 9th grade, I did my what's that called in English? Prio on
internship.
An internship as a professor in mathematics at Uppsala University.
Really?
So it was kind of interesting.
That's an awesome internship. By the way.
But then the Swedish university system didn't allow me to do any of the exams because I didn't have a degree in Swedish and English. Okay. So I couldn't do mathematics exams that I wanted to do. So I sort of became one of these people that sort of went completely berserk out of this. So since I knew all the mathematics, I didn't go to class of that, and I started sort of being more of a problematic kid and dealing more with theater and music and the things that I love to do. So I've done a lot of that. So at the age of 18, I was clear on my future career that I wanted to be an actor and a director, and was applying for theater schools. And I still believe that that's my biggest asset, that I've done a lot of theater and studying these things. And
in what way? Can you just elaborate a bit more? Why is that useful these days?
Because everything is about theater, you know. You sort of read people's faces. You know how you can express yourself. And
psychology part of it? Or
well, it's a mixture of both the psychology and the visualization of it. So how you appear on things. I remember when I went to one of these business schools, senior management educations, I got a teacher who was a former speechwriter for George Bush, the father, and he was a specialist in communication. He said that Jan, because abroad they call me Jan, he said, well, you're unique. There's only 3% of the world's population that is as you are. And what's that? He said, well, you speak in 3 dimensions. And I said, well, what does that mean? Well, he said, and I don't know if people will see this if they listen to it, but he says that 97% of the people say the world is round, and they do a 2-dimensional circle like this. But I say the world is round, and I use the room to sort of make use of this.
Body language is more 3D in some
sense. Exactly. So what I've learned over the years is both how I can use my voice, how I can use my body language, how I can interpret people when I speak to them, and so forth on that, and to sort of learn to become more convincing in a way, which I find quite useful.
I have to give an anecdote about this, because I think it's so amusing. And I remember the old Spotify days, and we had big offices in both Stockholm, in Sweden, and in US, in New York, and we even had people working in the exact same project at some point. And then we have these kind of weekly meetings and whatnot. And we had a Swedish person coming up speaking about, what the progress was in the last week, and he said, "Yeah, it didn't go that well. We did some progress, but we had a lot of challenges here and there, and blah blah blah. But yeah, some progress." And then the American guy came up, and he basically said, "It's been the most amazing week ever. We've done so much progress. The possibilities of this project will go bananas, and it will be amazing." And they worked on the same project. and I'm not sure for one, I think people, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, Gulan, but for one, they teach rhetorics, I think, more in American schools than they do in Swedish schools. But the ability to have the power of communication, just for reading it, but also being able to communicate to others in an efficient way, I think is so important, and something that's missing today in our current education, right?
Definitely. And I basically think that the drama should be one of the core subjects in school early on, because you use that such a lot to improve, a manager employee situation, for example. You can make a lot of use of that type of skills.
But what's the statistics here? How much is verbal communication and how much percentage is other types of communication in order to convey a message? There's done a lot of research here that obviously if you have tools to address your communication, not only verbally or like in what you're saying, but how you're saying it and how you're doing. And someone says, this is more than 50% of how you get your message across. Obviously, then to work, have experience on how to use your full body as an actor is trained to do. Must be brilliant.
I mean, I'm guy guessing again here, but I think that 80% is body language and 20% is what you express with words. But I mean, I've also done a lot of sort of singing and choir and stuff like that. And then you sort of, and music and stuff like that. And then you sort of also know that the way to be clear on what you're speaking about is, for example, if you make sure that every sentence you say, you make sure that the last letter of each word is heard. So you think that it is important that if you do that, you sort of then it becomes completely clear to everybody, because we usually swallow a lot of the
and I have a great story on this. One of my first bigger gigs as a moderator. This is when I was quite young, and we had what is called the sales conference, and we had hired Circus, and I was sort of moderating the whole conference. And because I was fairly new at presenting on a bigger stage, I mean, it's different to do 10 people, 100 people. Now we're talking 1,000. So at that point in time, we had a coach, a rhetorics coach, like a friend to the firm. And what we really did was to work with sort of tonation, where's your voice, like singing techniques,
using your stomach to speak,
using your stomach,
exactly.
and then purely if you're into music, where do you pause? How do you do crescendo?
Yeah.
Where do you put the pianissimo into it?
Exactly.
And that's amazing, right? Because now we're getting to this is the hardcore message. This is how the voice is used in the message, and now we get to the 80% is the body language. Yeah. So how much is verbal core content, and how much is delivery? That's the core topic here.
And I mean, there's many aspects you could add to this. I mean, my background is also that I'm from citizenship. I'm Norwegian, and we have another way of speaking and using our tone and music when we speak in a different way. So I think that I've inherited quite a bit of that as well. But just to finish off the story of who I am in this, so. After a while of applying to these theatre schools and realizing that I maybe was too young or maybe not good enough to be admitted, I found out that maybe it's not such a wise thing to have mathematics as your hobby and theatre as your profession. So I switched those ones around.
That's a good joke, by the way.
And well, it's clearly what happened. So I started on the engineering physics program in Uppsala, and I did that not because I was completely interested in engineering physics, but somebody said that was the most difficult you could do. So I thought that was kind of challenging. And then I went into that, but I still was passionate about theater. So I was a really lousy student. So I barely passed the courses.
You had too much fun in Uppsala, that's what you're saying.
Exactly, and I was playing a lot of theater.
You were part of the whole Spexit and plays and everything.
Exactly, and I did a lot of those things, and I still continue to do, actually, on this, because I like it, and I think it's so rewarding to work with these things. So all of a sudden, when I found myself that I was out of study loan from CSN, I got the advantage of being Norwegian, so I actually used the Norwegian Lånekassen, and they don't have any requirements that you need to take a certain amount of credits every year to be able to get your better. So I could sort of play around a little bit more, but then eventually I found myself I need to sort of earn a living to do this, and so I went to the teacher at the university that I liked the best, that I thought was the best performer. And I said to him that, do you need any help with the teaching? And so because I thought that was the best way to sort of stay within engineering physics, but still use my theater ambitions in that. So I became a teacher. And then after a few years, they started asking me about my PhD thesis. And I wasn't really aware that I was enrolled in the PhD education. I thought I was a teacher.
Practicality, that he had to solve it like that to put you there in order for you to teach.
Yeah.
But you forgot about the core topic.
Exactly. But then after a while, I mean, I found a really, afterwards, I can say I found a really interesting subject for my PhD thesis. So we were doing action research. We were helping the Swedish National Tax Board, Skatteverket, with their digitalization. We should call it that now, but they didn't know the word then. They said datorisering, computerization instead. And
what year was this approximately?
I started with Skatteverket in 1994. And, at that point, they were working with still the income tax declaration on paper. And the case handlers were sort of flipping through these and trying to make decisions upon this. And
I think the tax authorities are one of the best authorities that we have in terms of digitalization.
And there's just a coincidence that I was a researcher there and working with these things from 94 until 2004. I was actually there for 10 years in this process. So in 2004, they had completely digitalized what they were doing and also done this in a very brave way, I would say, and actually improved quite well in this. So I had the opportunity of following that as an action research case and helping them with everything from usability evaluations all the way to strategy.
Just before just to clarify the term, perhaps you should explain what action research really is as well.
Yes, action research is a particular research methodology that means that I'm not only interested in knowledge, I'm interested in change. So I actually participate in the change processes happening at the client, so to speak.
So you didn't just observe, you actually were participating.
Yeah, so I researched upon something where I'm myself acting, which is sort of problematic also from a methodological point of view and often sometimes criticized because of that. So I was there working with change processes. In the beginning, we were hired by the HR department, so we came in from the work environment issues into this. And they said, well, our staff has problems with the computers they use now because we've acquired this system that scans all the documents and we try to see them on the screen, but the scanner is so bad, so we need to sort of enlarge it so that we see sort of a third of an A4 page, and then you scroll to the side to read all of this, and you couldn't print it so that they could have a look at it. But it was amazing because somebody else working in a completely different place could see the same document and you could speak to each other. But then I was there and studied how this affected the workers' work situation and how we could improve their computerized tools in that.
So it's more from usability point of view, not really from a technological point of view, or
exactly from usability point of view. So the first time we started, they said, "Well, this project failed. Can you tell us why?" and so we started evaluating things. And then I said, "Well, maybe you should bring us in a little bit earlier, not evaluate when things have gone wrong." So we started doing design with them. And when doing design, we found out that, boy, we need to know much more about the work that you do. So we started doing quite a bit of ethnographic field work and trying to live with them. Then we discovered that to be able to do good design in such a professional work environment, you actually need to involve the users much more. So we started doing very much participatory design where the tax handlers themselves were actually designing their new systems. And at that point, we thought that the system developers would really hate this because they would think that this can't be a good thing. They're taking all the fun away from what we're doing. But they actually loved it. They said, well, boy, this is the first time somebody has actually said what they needed. And previously they had been given like the requirement specification to the users and couldn't you have a look at this if this looks okay? And they have a look at it and say, well, yeah. And then they develop a system and then they say, well, we can't use this, but you agreed to the requirement specification. Yeah, but we didn't understand what it was like. So we used a lot of prototypes, sort of mock-ups, paper-based drawings of the things that we were working with. And then eventually, when we came to the last few years, then we were working with the senior management on the strategies and on the system development processes. And at that point, I don't know if you remember, but there was a fashionable process called the rational unified process that everybody worked
rational
with.
rows.
Yeah, and so we worked on getting usability into that because it just didn't exist into that. So that was quite exciting.
It's very tempted to go into the whole, agile development phase. But I think I'll add that as a topic later and see, what your thoughts are about.
But the reflection is here that some of the stuff that you worked on and what is interesting when you come into the same topic as a consultant or a vendor can help with. And how obvious it becomes when we talk about it like this, and still we're not doing it.
No, exactly. But I mean, we're doing things better now than we did beforehand. But the amazing thing was that, just to bring in the topic you just wrote down, when you're then approaching agile methodologies, you would think that, okay, now usability will be there. But it isn't. It's still missing, in a sense, the focus on that.
I think this is such a misconception. Oh, we become agile now. Well, that is one toolbox. Customer centricity or UX is another toolbox. Design thinking is a third. And then we can come into the technical topics. I mean, it's like we get so hyped into...
let's have that as a topic later. And I just want to try to finish a bit of this.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I agree.
And you said you moved into engineering, and basically you started also doing a PhD then, more or less involuntarily, or
by accident, I say, and I mean, as part of your PhD, you do courses, right? Yeah. So the majority of my courses, since I was an engineer, was psychology and design. So it was more a social science PhD in that sense. Yeah. So I did that and got my PhD in 1996, which was 2 years into the tax board. So I continued 8 years after my PhD with the tax board after that. And interestingly enough, when I graduated with my PhD, I didn't know that I could stay there for many years and work with them. So in the interaction with the tax board, I said that you really should hire somebody that works with these things. So I wrote an ad for a job, thinking that this is a job I could take myself. And so I claim that I wrote Sweden's first UX ad on that, because this was in 1996, and I have so far not found an older UX role in Sweden.
Was it called UX as well?
No, it was called Usability Designer at that point. UX came 2000 or 1999. And when UX came, I was extremely critical to this, because for me it was just the same thing as usability, but just in new wrapping. But then I've sort of reworked that in a bit. But the tax board didn't accept my proposal for that, so I continued doing research. But then accidentally, a year or so later, I discovered that they had advertised for Usability Designer, and they actually had used quite a lot of the text that I wrote for that ad. But at that point, I was too busy in research, so I didn't apply for that. But in my job with the tax board, we worked as mentors for their first UX person in that sense. So I sort of claim to be sort of a father of the UX in those kind of businesses. But for sure, there's probably many who claim that they were self-taught UX people working in that fashion. In that.
What happens then?
Well, then I kept on doing that, and I found that one of the most influential ways to improve the world, because that's sort of my mission, is through teaching. and also with my acting background. So I really thought that we should actually have a UX education. Right. So I was part of formulating the UX program that we had at Uppsala University when I worked there, because I did my first 25 professional years I did at Uppsala University. So I designed such an education and became director of undergraduate studies, studierektor in that, and worked with such things.
Was it called UX at that time, or?
No, we called it usability designer, and we wrote a lot of papers about that, and my PhD students were sort of developing that, because I had many PhD students who were active in industry and working with these things on a consultancy basis. So we were really action researchers trying this one out were together with them.
Cool.
And then I think it was in 2003-04, I applied for and got a grant from the SSF, the Swedish Strategic Research Foundation. They had a mobility grant, which was a way to sort of fund people in academia working in industry. So I got full pay on one condition, and that was that I wouldn't set my foot in the university. I needed to be in industry. Okay. So I went to a consultancy company saying that you don't have to pay my salary, but I would want to work for you.
That's a reverse to many grants, right?
Yeah, exactly. But they still have these mobility grants, and they're quite popular. So I went to
I would like to understand more about this.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They have the opposite as well, so that people in industry could apply for the same mobility grant to work in academia. So this is a way to get more of the mobility between academia and industry. I didn't even know that existed. It is, and it's a great grant that they've had for a long time. So I got this, and I worked with a company that doesn't exist anymore. Was called IT-arkitekterna at the time, and Frontwalker. And there as they couldn't sort of bill my hours because they didn't pay my hours, I was sort of working with their own business development and working up processes for usability. And we built a usability team of 6 people within the company and did consultancy on that, and sort of got more and more interested in collaborating with industry and not only with public authorities that I did from beforehand. But in 2005, I realized that, well, now I've been at Uppsala University 25 years, and I'm still in the room beside my former supervisor. So, and he said that I always should take over after him, but I didn't see that coming within soon, because he wasn't that much older than me. So I actually started applying for other jobs, and I got I was ranked number 1 for the professorship at KTH, which I was actually a little bit surprised over, because I thought I had many even better competitors in that, but maybe they saw something there. So I got a position there at KTH, and then
Professorship in what?
In human-computer interaction.
Can you just very briefly define, what is human-computer?
Well, it's the study of the interaction between human beings and computerized systems, in a sense. So it can be anything from operating a nuclear power plant to operating your mobile phone, basically. Yeah. And also it's defined as also studying major phenomena surrounding this. So it could sort of be the influence it has on the society, or what the processes, software engineering processes for usability would look like, and so forth. So it is a broad subject in that. And nowadays it's actually part of the computer science curriculum that you teach on this. And if you look into, for example, ISO standards that I've also been working for 25 years with, it's belongs under ergonomics, so it has a heritage to human factors and ergonomics traditions to work with these kind of things. But I've always seen myself as the bridge between the user side, the HR side, and the hardcore technology side on this, and trying to get users to be more understandable of the software developers and their missions, and then on the opposite side, also getting the developers to understand and want to socialize with and get to know users in that sense.
Awesome. So then you stayed for like, I'm trying to move on because we have so many.
But a quick guide through that. So when I started at KTH, I was also offered to be the manager of the group. And I've always been interested in leadership. Yeah. So I went into leadership and I did some kind of tough changes as a leader there. So I was immediately promoted to be the dean, which was moving from being a boss of 70 people to being the boss of 400 people instead.
So, and what's the definition of the dean?
Dean is a head of a school.
Which is a school within KTH.
Yeah, and at that time KTH had 10 schools, which meant that I was like a rector for a tenth of KTH. Basically, I was in charge of economy, of staff, and of all the things you're in charge of.
So you are the P&L owner of a school. In business terms.
Yeah, more or less so. And then I did that for 7 years, and then we did a big organizational change, and then I said that I've been working on the side with this issue of digitalization. And you've gotten to know me as a big critic towards the inability for our university to digitalize itself. So therefore, what's the best way of silencing a critic? Well, you make him responsible for it. So I proposed that I would be in charge of the digitalization of KTH. So I became vice president for digitalization, and that's the position I
So is that the only? Do you have a dual position now? Or is that a full-time job in itself?
Well, it's a 70% part of my job, but my basic position is I'm a professor in human-computer interaction. So I will always have the opportunity to go back to that. But then maybe more interesting, I mean, at the university, you're always allowed to have side activities as well. So in 2012, I had a friend who said that, you should follow me to this seminar that is happening at the government. And I said, well, what's that? Well, it's the IT minister that's going to present a sort of a new digital agenda that they're talking about. And I thought that was fun. And so I went there, and they were about 30, 40 people in the room. And then again, I used my theatrical skills. So I got two chances of saying things, and I managed to say things that maybe pulled down a few laughs and sort of became something memorable. So not long after, I got an invitation from Anna-Karin Hatten, the Minister of IT and Energy, which it actually was back then as well.
Strange combination.
To be in charge of the newly established Commission for Digitalization, which was in 2012. An assignment that was supposed to last for 3.5 years. So I got to employ 7 people that worked with me on that. And then it was prolonged a year. And we sort of made I think it was 7 different SOU, Statens offentliga utredningar, based on that. And actually wrote the draft of what is now the Swedish Digitalization strategy as well on that. And based on that, I was invited then to come back to the Digitalization Council, which is more like an advisory group to the minister. So now I'm awaiting my 8th minister, hopefully being launched soon.
You'll be wearing them out, right?
Yeah, I have been 8 ministers representing 3 different political parties in that. So it's been a really
and the
digitalization
job. Position has shifted a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a small part position for me, but nowadays we meet the minister 3 or 4 times a year to talk about and provide guidance and inputs on various different topics. But frankly, now for the last minister, which I think was one of the best, he was just caught up in energy crisis. So he just didn't have time for digitalization.
And that's the point, right? So the digitalization minister, so to speak, has always had a second or third or fourth other topics.
Yeah. We had one that was housing and digitalization, and we've had different variants of
energy, housing, energy back again,
Yeah, and then we've also, I mean, they belong to the Ministry of the Enterprise, and then they belong to the Ministry of the Infrastructure and things like that. So you have this silo structure of the government that is maybe a bit problematic in that sense.
You don't need to answer this. Do you think there is a better home for digitalization? If you look at it rationally, logically.
So, what subjects do receive attention in media? Well, it's subjects where you have a conflict, where there's parties that believes completely different things, and I think that one of the problems with digitalization is that there's just not a party that is against digitalization. So therefore, it's not debated that much. It was debated quite a bit in relations to digitalization of schools, because we've had ministers who've been sort of against digitalization in schools. You remember a minister of education that said we're going to forbid iPads in schools and things like that, which I think wasn't sort of the most progressive decisions to make, to put it mildly, on this. So then it's that's more or less one of the few fields where it happens. E-health and digitalization in such cases have been it as well. But when it comes to the discussion of the lacking politics in healthcare, it's not been about digitalization.
No,
it's been about other things.
So a problem that Sweden, perhaps, or politicians is not focusing that much or as much as it should on digitalization is that everyone thinks the same. Everyone is for it. And we need to have some more conflicts about it.
Yeah, exactly. So can you create a conflict?
No, because it doesn't shift, if I'm really cynical, it doesn't shift voters. Because if you all think the same on this topic, that's not where I can put a position in for my... So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden we are missing maybe some of the most important investments and how we are dealing with that and how it can maybe be a way to release other Gordian knots, so to speak, in energy and etc. But because we are not debating it, we are not becoming literate on the topic enough.
No.
Because we don't need. We have other more pressing topics to be literate and argumentative about.
Yeah.
I don't know. So is that what? So this is an interesting topic. This is very interesting. I haven't thought about it like you said it right now.
No, I mean, you could think about this in many different ways, but I think that it's not that digitalization doesn't have a direction in politics. I think that it has. I mean, we have a digital agenda or digitalization strategy right now that is...
But we don't have an AI strategy, at least.
No.
We have some kind of guidelines.
Yeah, but maybe we're approaching something. I mean, with the work with the AI agenda, in that sense, was an attempt to do it like that. But if you look at the digitalization agenda, they put out one clear goal, that Sweden should be the best country in the world to use the opportunities of digitalization. And I think that...
To use.
Yeah, to use, exactly. Not to develop, but to use this. And I think that actually was an interesting goal that was put, because at the time we were very highly ranked on for example, the World Economic Forum's Networked Readiness Index and so forth.
Let's go there for a second, I think.
Yeah.
It's interesting, how do you rank Sweden in terms of digitalization compared to other countries?
Yeah. So I've been looking at several different sort of rankings on this, and this Networked Readiness Index in 2012 or 11, I think we were number one on the list. And then we dropped, and then it became like a way to hit the minister. So we're doing worse than before. And the interesting thing then was that, well, you have a competition of 300 countries, and if you're one or three, well, what's the big problem in a sense? And I would actually, being a Norwegian interested in skiing, I would say that, well, maybe sometimes you should lie in the air behind the leading one, and then just before you pass the goal line, you pass before them. But in a sense here, you could see that this was a situation where you could use the data to actually come up with measures that you need to do. So all of these rankings, they have visualized their data in many different ways. So I, at the time, I looked at the data on, for example, education. It turned out that we were the second country in the world in the Network Readiness Index. But when it came to the quality of the math and science education, we were on place 34, I think, in the world, just after Bahrain.
I didn't understand that. So the second when it comes to math and the STEM education?
No. We were second in the aggregated of all aspects.
Okay.
But then if you look at, okay, how come we're not the first one? You should look at which one is the sort of...
What pulls you down?
Yeah, what pulls you down in that. And particularly it was in relations to education. Finland is usually on top of these lists. And so I actually took this information where we were just behind Bahrain, and I showed it to the
Bahrain is not high up in the list, right?
No, but they're higher than us when it came to education.
In some fields, right? Or
in math and science.
Math and science.
Which is
STEM,
kind of broad
STEM,
in a sense, STEM related.
Yeah.
So I was showing this to the minister, saying, this is where you should put your efforts, right? This is where things needs to be done. And he just looked at the list and saying, which country was after Sweden on the list? It was the United States. And he said, well, we win over the United States, at least. That was his statement.
Finding excuses, I hear.
But I think the problem here was that the silo structure of the government. So the Minister of Digitalization was sort of residing under the department of the Ministry of the Enterprise, but the education was under the Ministry of Education, which at the time was not only a different minister, but a minister from a different political party. So there was also this sort of party politic fight over these things. So not much happened in that. And so with that as an argument, we were saying that we really need to do things about education. And interestingly enough, I went to a seminar at the government where they were talking about the future of education. And at that time, the education minister at the time said, well, I had a side talk with her, and she said that can't you create a new AI education? How long time would it take for you to create an AI education? And I said, well, give me some time, I go back and investigate it. And I went back to my university and asked my AI professors there and said, well, what can we do and how long time would it take? And they said, well, if we get about 2 years to investigate this, we can come up with a new engineering degree in AI, and that's going to be a 5-year civil engineering AI specialization. So in 7 years, the first could graduate on that. And then I went back to the minister and said, well, I've now talked to my staff, and they say that if you give us the assignment now, we can start an education in 7 years. And then she said, what? I wanted you to be ready before the election. And this was in May, and the election was in September. So that tells you a little bit about the perspectives of politics, that the single most important thing of politics is winning the election, right? So these long-term things weren't really working.
But it goes in many topics that the long-term things is really being heard.
Yeah.
And there's so many debates going on right now, I think, in relation to the election we just had, how obvious it is that we are lacking in putting focus and stamina on longer goals. And we can talk about many different topics here, but let's take digitalization and not go anywhere else. This is a problem. It becomes a real problem because we are only investing in stuff that we can show results in short time spans, and we know some of the stuff we do. It needs compounding effects, needs proper foundation, and needs stamina over a long time. We're fundamentally changing paradigms in some areas. And this is now, how to get that on the agenda. I think that's a very Gordian knot to solve.
Yes, we have many Gordian knots here today. But yes, of course. But I think that here, if you mix this discussion then with the discussion on the pandemic, you see really interesting effects. Because when colleagues of mine, actually before the pandemic, started turning the education into a completely digital one, we funded a few projects on sort of digitalizing a few courses. And as one example I usually take was a course that was a late course in one of the engineering programs that usually had 25 students per year, and they get some funding to sort of very professionally turn that into a digital course, and then they started advertising this course on internet, and now they have 10,000 students per year on that course. And I was simply thinking that, well, what an efficiency increase that you could make out of this, which sort of the pandemic pushed in a sense. So I would very much like a discussion where you could sort of think about what happens when you do that. Because if you have 10,000 students instead of 25, you can't sit and correct exams, right?
Forces automation.
Yeah, so you need to automate it, and then you, of course, you could work with peer grading and so forth, but you really need to make use of AI to help you in correcting these assignments, and you need to design an entire software system that could help you in that process. So you're really sort of changing the way that you're educating. And interestingly enough, also, I observed that the focus of universities is usually teaching people between 19 and 25, and then that's where we put our efforts, right? But when you start advertising the courses the way that they did, they got students that were 60 and even students that were 15 that found that this was interesting. So you could actually make use of this to make something that becomes more of lifelong learning. So it changes completely the perception of what a university is. So if we're supposed to be, as in the old days, something that you're supposed to get your higher education degree, you graduate by 25 years of age about, and then you go out and work in industry, never to return. Because when we give people their diplomas, it's like saying, bye-bye, now we close the door to what you're doing. So I actually think that diplomas may even be harmful in this sense. We should sort of leave a door open that you could come back and refuel new knowledge and new experience that you need. And it would be useful for us as teachers to hear what you are working on and what you can learn from that, and we could provide you with up-to-date knowledge on things that you haven't had. Because I did an engineering physics degree in computer science. There wasn't any courses in AI at that time. It just didn't exist. But now it's the single most popular subject for our students to take at the university. So this is the change that is happening. So therefore, I think that we really need to find a way where universities could sort of refocus on also teaching to the sort of bigger community out there.
If we look at what if I try to sort of iterate and summarize what you said now, from working more in business and having these kind of discussions on enterprise level with a company like Scania or Vattenfall, we need to be a business. So what you're talking about now is, we like to sometimes refer to first principles, right? So it's like, what's the core first principles of education? And then basically we what are we trying to do? We need to reinvent ourselves, and we need to sort of sort out that actually the way we define our product, our service, diplomas, well, first principle, and then go back and we end up in another offering for lifelong learning. It's a very different operating model, if I now use enterprise lingo all the way through here. And here we come to the topic, how do we now start dealing with this? Because the way I see it is that we have lived with, in what I would argue, quite low innovation pressure. So basically we had stable processes, stable enough to draw swimming lanes that we can live by. And here we have Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns, and we have technology and innovation pressure is clearly going up everywhere. So it means our ability to adapt, flexibility is fundamentally a different operating model, that it's not economies of scale that is the mantra anymore. It's the economy of learning and economy of adaptability. Yeah. So here is the fundamental steering mechanisms of the organism needs to change. So that is a long rant.
Yeah.
But, where do you stand on sort of how do you sort of comment on what I sort of laid out?
So I think that basically universities of today, and also the Department of the Ministry of Education, is very much focused on that the single most important part of the education is to give people an exam. And I'd rather like to give people knowledge. I think knowledge is more important than exams in this sense. But when I'm saying this, my boss thinks that I'm crazy in a sense, because we're measured on exams.
And what's the utility of the exam? It helps us to get in the system of how we get jobs and all that. It's a utility of the exam, of course.
Yeah, but
not only that, because you get money to the university based on exams, right?
Yeah. So
with the current model,
the current model has the exam as a core mechanism in here.
But there are exceptions to these models. So, for example, in my subject in UX, we've sort of been experimenting around, rather than sort of having a collection of past courses, thinking about that maybe we should start by you designing your portfolio of things that you're doing, and then you add to your portfolio different achievements that you've done. You've written this report, you've programmed this system, you've designed this function, and so forth. And just like a photo model is showing images that somebody has taken of him or her, you could show your portfolio. This is what I know. And here comes another interesting thing. I think that one of my great sources of inspiration to this is actually my wife. She's working with HR and working at a big IT consultancy company with this. And at one point, she when she was hired, the manager says, "Well, we need to hire now 400 programmers. Get going on this." And after less than a week, he was coming back saying, "Are you ready soon? We need them now." And she was just saying that it couldn't work like this. So what they did, which I found quite interesting at the company, was that they decided to gamify the recruitment. So they turned the requirement specification of the position into a computerized game. So potential candidates could go in and solve different problems and level in this system, and then they could start the hiring process with those that came out the best. The interesting thing there was that actually the gender equality was much better as a result of this game than from the usual recruitment processes, which of course then was probably skewed by the fact that the managers recruiting were mostly male, so they would recruit people that were similar to them. But in this game there was actually equally many females as males that came out well. The second thing that she told me was that as a matter of fact, there's many people who haven't actually finished their degree, but they score very well with what they need to know in this. So, and then they've acquired knowledge through different channels. So maybe we're now assessing to what extent you fulfill a predefined path of courses with a certain examination. That's what we do. And we're the Bureau of Assessment. That's basically what a university is. And then it is also, of course, a research factory in a sense, and presenter of research. But the assessment factory is what I'm critical towards here. So maybe we should sort of rethink how we're doing this. So if the company is hiring people because they know something rather than that they have a particular degree, maybe we should educate them to know something rather than to get a certain degree. That's sort of my argumentation.
Sounds very absurd. Yeah, of course. It sounds good. But how do you go there? I mean, can you really change? I mean, there are so many online courses these days, and people are, I think using in their CVs more and more, exams from online courses than from universities.
Yeah. From Stanford on the one hand side, Coursera on the other side.
Yeah. And I mean, today also there's a big discussion on how could you work with validation of acquired skills. So somebody could come in and have a set of knowledge that they have acquired, and then they ask the university to validate their skills. And to some extent, maybe we should actually test them rather than just see what types of certificates they have. Because then you can't fool yourself through an education if you actually look at what they're actually able to do. So if you start hiring people by what they actually do, they try out different tasks, then maybe we should deliver an education that does this as well. And how do you design such an education? Well, I made a few experiments with this when I was more involved with teaching than I am right now. And particularly I made contracts with different companies and moved my courses out into the company. So instead of teaching at the university facilities, we were sort of going out to the companies, teaching there. And the students, and this was a course on usability evaluation, the students, rather than working on our artificially created tasks because they're easy to assess in our system, were rather working with Aftonbladet.se and Saab's autonomous helicopters and testing these things instead. And then when I came out as a teacher to the industry, I got to see what it looks like there. So I learned a lot, and they had a really good step into the company because they had gotten to learn people there, and the company were happy because they had recruitable students that they could have. So this is a completely new way of thinking.
And the tricky point here is that ultimately, like in any business endeavor, you have your business model that you need to translate into an operating model and your revenue streams. And what is quite interesting now is that I think if you want to truly change the underlying educational system and for a university, you need to understand your how will that impact and how will we change our revenue streams, so how will this work? I mean, like I think you have a brilliant idea here. I mean, like one example is we put people through a process to give them exams. Okay, so they pay for this and they do that, and we get them exams. You can imagine, like, what if you are a certifier or assessor? So like, I don't really care how you acquired your knowledge. You could have done it on YouTube, but in the end, I can give you a certification that you can, that's another business model. You don't need to go through all my classes, but in the end, you can get the stamp of approval.
Yeah.
I mean, like, all these things ultimately is all together. So if we want to reimagine the educational system, the business model still needs to make sense in some ways.
But this is why I think we need to rethink the business model. We can't have a business model that is based on the number of lectures you provide and the number of students you take in for your things and the number of students you graduate, which is the way it looks today. We need to think in a completely different fashion about this, and I think we slowly can build that. I mean, 2 years ago, we started at KTH and saying that we should have much more lifelong learning. I think at that time we had like 0.1% of lifelong learning in the overall curriculum that we had. Then we had a vice president for education that said, well, before 2023, it should be 20%. Which is sort of an enormous increase in what we're doing. So basically, we started working on how can we sort of develop our education to make it useful for the people out there that need these things, for people in industry then you see, what do people in industry need? Well, they're really keen on learning, but they can't take their normal business hours doing the learning. So they need to have a flexible structure on what you learn and when you learn it, which requires then that you digitalize the education to make it available in that way for people.
And here's the connection now, because you're reinventing the business model, you're coming up with certain things.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, we cannot deliver this in the same way as we did in the analog way.
No,
we need to figure. The operating model changes, and therefore the whole environment digitally changes.
But going to more concrete examples of this,
that's good fun.
Thinking, there is, I think, a huge gap, of course, in how traditional education has been working, and you have this kind of standard, like you study in the early years and then you work forever, to a more continuous learning approach, a more agile, if I would call it that, approach to doing education. And for me personally, I just actually at work took like a 4-day course provided by work, and I thought it was extremely waste of time.
Yeah, okay. You took the wrong course. It wasn't KTH. So, yeah.
No, but it was a really good course. The outcome was really good and important and valuable. But I think, Jesus Christ, going a course for 4 days, that's insane.
So you're becoming quite agile now. You wanted to do it.
But thinking about, normally for a master you can go 4 years and you think that's okay. And this kind of gap about, how you properly do lifelong learning when you have very much more incremental or small pieces of knowledge that you continuously learn instead of learning everything at once and then forget it.
Yeah.
It's a super big change, right? Do you think universities can move in that direction and have a big part of that?
I think we've actually shown that we're able to as well, because one example that we did that I'm really proud of, the fact that we managed to do it because we did it against the will of the management of the university, was something called the Software Development Academy, which was we got a grant from Wallenberg and from the European Science Foundation to make a really quick education of newly arrived immigrants that had some sort of higher education. How could we sort of help them to get sort of an equivalent of a bachelor in computer science quickly, and how long time do you need to be able to do that? And we could get it down into, I think it was 12 to 14 weeks of a 3-year study. We got it down into
really good.
that.
That is good.
And then we took students that were newly arrived immigrants. They had a residence permit in Sweden, so we took them in, and this worked extremely well. So I think it was about 70% of them had a job after a month or two after their graduation of these 14 weeks on this. And the interesting thing was that when I visited them, because I didn't do this education myself, I was managing it, and so I visited them when they were close to graduation, and I asked them, what do you think about your education here? And they said, well, it's great, but it's so big a problem at KTH to go and have lunch. And I said, what? Yeah, because there's so many headhunters outside offering us jobs. So we don't really know. Can you say no to a headhunter? Is that possible? Will it get back to it? And these were people that came with names that usually made them not be the one picked for interviews when they applied for positions. They could have applied for hundreds of positions without ever getting to an interview. And now the headhunters were queuing up to hire them. So we could actually condense, speaking of your inefficiency and what you learn, we could condense this into really a short and quick way of doing it. And then it was full-time studies, and it was a lot of also project-based things where they actually created things together, and they worked in a great fashion. So we did this for, I believe it was 11 rounds of 25 people or so in each, a few hundred people that went through this, and was extremely popular. But when we asked the university about this, they said, no, we can't do this. Why not? Because it's illegal. They said, What do you mean? Well, in Sweden, you cannot buy your education. You cannot buy a higher education. So then we need to do this as commissioned education. So uppdragsutbildning, that you sort of have a company that buys your education. That's fine, but as an individual, you're not allowed by law to acquire your education in that sense. But so then we said, but now we have a grant to pay for this education. So it's actually the grant that pays for them to do it, but that wasn't possible to do. So we actually teamed up with an HR company that was specialized in the area, and then they could buy the education from us on that. So we gave them the money that we got to buy the education from us. Then it worked, because then it wasn't the individuals that bought this.
I love the innovative ideas of solving,
and I think that unfortunately, I mean, when the grant was over, this wasn't anything that we as a university could take over and do with our state grants. Yeah. That wouldn't have been allowed to do. So I mean, we have mechanisms in which we have come up with.
And you have
great new
mechanisms,
ideas.
but then there are other mechanisms that needs to be in place or sorted.
Yes. And one of the problems here is that industries, and I've spoken to quite a few industrial leaders, and they're quite keen on paying for their staff's education. They now realize that we just can't do what like Ericsson did 10 years ago, when they fired 10,000 people and hired another 10,000 with a different degree on. They need to work on reskilling their staff, so they need to come up with completely new ways of working with that and teaching their staff on that. So usually the highest management, they think that this is great. We can do that, and money isn't a problem. We could buy educations for them. But then in the end, when it comes to the local manager somewhere that's supposed to bill your hours on doing this, then it just don't happen the way that the manager thinks it should do. So we have a bit of a problem, both in terms of getting individuals to want to educate themselves after they've gotten their full education, getting industry to sort of pay for education, getting universities to change the education to fit this, getting the study loan system to support you getting your second degree, although we now have this omställningsstudiestöd that would allow you to sort of at least spend 8 months in trying out something new in this. And we need the politicians to sort of change the legislations around how higher education.
So they're multifaceted topic.
It's a system problem.
It's a system problem.
So you can't just change one part of this system. You need to sort of change the entire system to work in a different direction. And that's what makes this such a wicked problem to work with.
I think there are a lot of companies and organizations willing to pay for an education like that if it were to be made available. I think we really need to move on here. The time is flying away.
I have so many questions. I have rabbit holes on this.
I think we can simply summarize it as I guess there are lots of opportunities of improvement, if we call it like that, when it comes to, I guess, digitalizing and transforming education into something that is more fit to our current day of working and living, right? Right?
Yeah.
And I guess it's a positive thing.
And I want to pick up the last sentence. This is a systems problem. Because it's for the educational system, it's for the enterprises that need to digitize.
Yes.
And it's a different ball game, because you need to have a cohesive approach to it, and you need to address them all. So I don't know when we're going to talk about this, but I think this is the real, at the bottom of the Gordian knots is how to work cohesively with these topics. Because it changes everything. It changes how you need to organize a university. Because I don't care that you have 5 different disciplines. I care about the cross-functional team where the 5 different disciplines work well together. How will you educate for that? I mean, and it goes on. Yeah. So it's a system problem, I think, is a summary.
I couldn't agree more.
Taking the next topic then, but still connected to this, and trying to move also, since we're already more than 7:30 already. We can think about, the tech companies that are moving, very fast in terms of both economics. They are the top most valuable companies in the world today. The top in like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft of the world, and Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, etc. in China. And they're also not just leading the tech and AI and digitalization, but they also are driving education to a large extent, and they're also hiring a lot from academia. They're basically taking the top talents, I would argue, even professors and also students very quickly from universities and just hiring them with a headhunting problem, as you mentioned. What do you think about this? Is this a problem? Do you think that the universities will have a place in the future, or will it continue to be a transition where the top talents and education and research will be led by tech companies rather than universities?
I think the universities will play a big role in the future, but they need to be more agile and more adaptable to the future life. And if they keep on not changing the way that or the slow change that has happened so far, I think that the days are counted in that respect. When I lecture about this, I try to for the pedagogical reason, I try to explain to them what a classical teaching situation looked like in the university, and I describe a situation where I stand in front of a class, and they usually in a cinema seating type of thing where there could be 500 students there, and I stand and I do this sort of one-way communication in what I'm doing, and I explain this situation to them. I don't get any questions back and what it looks like and so forth, and I had people sleeping and people sitting with the laptops or speaking to each other or doing other things. And then when I tell people and I say, could you imagine what this looks like? And then I show them a picture. Picture is 1,000 years old. It's a picture from Bologna, which is sort of the teaching situation. That looks exactly like that. So I use that pedagogically to sort of explain that we haven't sort of developed since
innovated
that
the
time.
core model.
No, exactly. And so therefore we need to rechange. We need to redefine how we do these things. And I think that one fun example that I had from before the pandemic was that our director of undergraduate studies came to me and said, Gulan, we have some problems with your teaching now. And I said, well, what's the problem? Well, the students aren't coming to class. And I said, and then he said, but I've solved the problem. I've decided that from now on your lectures will be mandatory. And I said, well, maybe that's not the decision I would want to see on that. Could you just give me some time and I'll try to explore what has actually happened? So I went to my class and individually I went to have a talk with them, and I went to one guy that was a guy that asked me before the first class, saying that, is it okay if I put my telephone here and film your lecture, because I have cognitive problems and I'm dyslexic and I have ADHD and so forth, so I really need this to have a look at this. So I interviewed him and asked him, how does this work? And he said, this is superb. He said, I watch 1 minute of your lecture a few times after each other, and then I feel that this is the first time I could really grasp what you're doing. So he does rewind things and watch it again. And I said, well, that's great, but could you help me here? How come people aren't coming to class anymore? And then he said, yeah, I put the film on Facebook as well. and I said, okay. So I started interviewing a few of the others, and I found these really amazing stories. So there was one Iranian girl who said that, well, I found some software where I could subtitle your lecture in Persian. So we're meeting all of the family every Friday night to watch this week's lecture together and talk about it afterwards. And there was another guy that always looked very sleepy that said, well, I think your filmed lectures are great because I think you speak so slowly, so I watch it in double speed, and therefore I could do it double as quick to do these things. And
This is the Facebook guy.
No, it was not the guy putting it on Facebook, but it was another guy that used his Facebook movie on that. And my point here is that where's the innovation? Well, the innovation is with the students. They're the one that comes up with the new ways of learning in this sense and making use of whatever is there.
So back to your Skatteverket.
Yeah, the user center, the design of things, and so I kind of find this as the interesting source for development. That if we could work more with having these people being involved in the innovation of our education,
so in the end,
amazing stuff.
There was a different channel. People were getting what they needed in a different way than sitting physically in the lecture.
Exactly.
And because they were doing it digitally, they could enhance by putting subtitles on it and rewind it or speed it up.
And make it more accessible for people with disabilities, which is one of the concerns that I do quite a bit of research on, because I digged out statistics from KTH's education, and right now there's 10% of our students that have reported a disability that they have diagnosed that makes them need specific support for their education. They may need longer time for their exams, or they may need a sound version of the course literature or whatever is there. And the interesting thing is that out of those 10%, it's 1,400 students, right? So it's quite a lot of them. You would see that who are they? Well, 1% is people with blind or vision problems. 1% is people with hearing problems. 2% are people with mobility problems. And 96% are people with cognitive problems. Half of them are dyslexic and therefore need all sorts of help in this. So subtitle lectures are superb for them.
So innovation in terms of UX or usability of education is something that we need more of, right?
Not only usability, but accessibility also.
Accessibility.
Yeah.
But the user-centric innovation is actually at the core of this anecdote.
Yeah. You could say that. I mean, that's sort of the core of me as well.
I get that.
Sort of the user-centered design person in that sense.
Thinking that we only have a short period of time left, I'm thinking if we could switch to a more like lightning talk session where we ask some questions. We have a number of topics that we would like to cover, and we tried to limit them to a couple of minutes of answers or discussion.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's a great idea, Anders.
But yeah, we'll probably fail, but we could try.
It's my fault that night.
No, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
We all have the same problem, I think. If we just move to HCI or human-computer interaction in general, how, if you were to, in 30 seconds, try to still describe how that has evolved in the last 10, 15 years. How would you say human-computer interaction has transitioned over the years?
Over the last 10 to 15 years, it's gone from being a rare subject that only a few people did to being one of the single most popular roles in software development these days.
You need basically to have a UX person in most teams.
Yeah, I've heard so many companies say that that's sort of the most important person in their software development team. So.
Is there some connection to, if we move more into AI, let me give you a short anecdote here. And I know my mom, for example, she worked in healthcare, and she was really scared when the healthcare system digitalized, and they had to use digitalized journals, and they had to use a form-based system to write in, whatever happened for a patient in the journals, and you couldn't edit anything, and the UI was horrible. And I think a lot of people think that the more things become digital, the worse the interaction will be, and the less efficient people will be. I would argue, and please disagree, is that as we continue to become more and more data and AI driven, at least, it will make the interfaces easier, and it will make the interaction with machines or computerized systems going back almost to what it was when you didn't have computerized systems to work with. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, and you want me to have a quick answer to a long question here. I think we could see from, for example, Svenskan och Internetstiftelsen's studies that's presented next week, I think, or 2 weeks from now, this year. So you could see that those that are not using computers today is basically, it's very few that do not use computers at all, and those are typically the elderly. And if you see upon why they're not using it, the reason why, the biggest reason why is because they don't see any use of it.
Yeah.
But the hard to use or lacking usability, that's decreasing every year in their studies. Right. So it's becoming better and better.
So we're using more fancy, we can use voice to talk to a computer, we can have different ways. So the UX becomes
and it's more and more personalized,
Personalized.
Yeah, and it's also so that 20 years ago you couldn't use a computerized systems without reading the manual first. The kids of now, they don't even know what a manual is anymore because it's supposed to be self-explained.
If the system is not intuitive, it's bad.
Exactly. And speaking of elderly, I love this story about my mother-in-law who's 80 years old, and I wanted to launch a day when I was digital champion to say that I want to have one day a year where we bring some of our relatives or friends online that are no longer that haven't been there. New Technique asked me, well, have you done that? And we want to do a study or an interview with her. And so I brought her to my mother-in-law, and she hadn't been using computers at all at work, even though she was a highly educated psychologist. So then we got her a tablet computer, and I asked her, do you need any help? And she said, no, I think that's going to sort out. And then a few weeks later when I came back, I thought that, well, probably I'm going to see that she hasn't used it at all. But I opened it and had a look, and I could see that, wow, she's buying theater tickets online, she's buying food online, she's even buying booze from Systembolaget online, and she's even downloading illegal movies. and that's when I discovered that she was also using Skype to chat with her grandchildren that showed her all of these things. And I said, well, this is amazing. You've always said that you hated computers. And she said, yeah, computers. But this is an iPad, she said. So for her, an iPad wasn't a computer. And I think that with all of these systems that become more and more ubiquitous or invisible or voice controlled or gesture controlled or whatever it is, we will not be as hostile or afraid of using them as we were in the past with the computers that we thought that they were only for the experts in this sense.
So the future will rather make machines more accessible, right?
Yeah,
and you shouldn't be afraid of it.
And adaptable to your knowledge levels and to help you also to start using them and engage with them. So I hope that it will be even easier when you think about human AI interaction rather than human computer interaction in that sense.
Do you want to leave this topic, or I have a side question on this?
Please say. I have another connected one. But
so this is a connected one.
Okay.
So a lot of the conversations we've had is all about, we need to optimize, if I talk about AI now, we need to optimize the use of data and AI for what purpose that is good, and then augment sort of the human and let the person be good at what they should be good at. So we talk about, that an AI can be very good at sorting things, categorizing things and stuff like that. So to some degree, to imagine like on more knowledge-intensive processes that the AI can take over the whole thing, it's very crazy to think about or difficult to think about. But if you start understanding that in an end-to-end knowledge-intensive process, the AI is doing something much better than us, and the human is doing something better, like maybe synthesizing or reasoning in relation to something. So that sort of whole spiel, let the AI be good at what the AI is good at, let the human be good at what the human is good at. what is your thoughts around UX, where basically we as people will be better at interacting with the sort of the work that the AI is doing? How should we think about managing huge numbers, or the things that we are typically bad at, but that we can have an AI to augment our processes? So what does that mean?
So maybe I'm reinterpreting your question here, but I mean, many times it's this discussion on who's best. Is it the AI or is it the human being on these things, and try to come up with and compete with each other. But every time they seem to end up with the conclusion that the best solution is to have humans and AIs collaborating on things.
So this is the core argument.
Yeah.
We need to have AI and humans collaborating.
Yes.
And I was doing a long spiel sort of sorting out where, what is the AI good at? Now, what is the essence of effective collaboration UX-wise between the AI and the human, in your opinion?
I think if you could have the AI be good at tracking the knowledge and skills level of the user, so that they could adapt to their particular needs in that respect, it would be much more suitable for what we need. I mean, we've seen examples in old HI literature on how you make a remote control for your TV set for somebody that has Alzheimer's and only should be able to move sound up and forth and switch channels and nothing else at all. And you make things really, really simple. But I mean, with the future systems, you could make them adaptable. So when you know a little bit, that's what you can do. And if you want to increase your skills and do other things, you could add different skills to it in that sense. So I think that you will have systems that adapt and evolve together with the humans. So they sort of teach each other on this. And then the AI systems should also then be good at tracking what am I doing and what are my needs based on what I'm doing in that sense. And I think that we more and more get systems that behave in that way and are good at tracking that. I mean, at my university, we have examples of teaching situations where you have systems that automatically tracks how you behave in computing tasks or in mathematics tasks, and then they present the assignments in a pace that is adapted to what you're able to do. So if you feel that you know multiplikationstabellen, then they're gonna move forward because they realize that you do everything right here. We don't need to deal with that anymore. Then we can move on that. And there's quite a bit of research happening at my university on these type of automatized systems where you could become more efficient and also learn more things and learn things with higher quality in that respect. So
machines and humans adapting together.
Yes. I think the AI systems adaptive in relation to the human interaction.
And human adapt as well.
And human because so they're learning together.
Adapt together.
Yeah, that's
the core thing.
They co-develop. Yeah.
Yes. Co-develop. Interesting.
I think it was you that said it. I'm not sure if you said it, but I think so. And I don't know the English word for it, but I think you said something about the digital skyddsronder or something. At some point I heard you.
Work environment protection rounds is what it's called.
I thought that sounds so awesome. Can you just describe your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So when I was a boss at the university, my safety expert came and did the yearly audits of my work environment. And
from a physical point of view.
Yeah, and it was typically, this cable, it looks like the cleaning staff will trip over it. And do you know how you can set your chair to be
ergonomically correct?
Yeah, and do you need to have, what is that called, handlovsstöd for your keyboard so that you can relax that. That was as close as they came to the computer. None of these safety staff ever asked, Do I get too many emails? Is the response time in the computer too slow, or things such as that? So our idea there was that we should not only analyze the physical or social or organizational work environment, we should check the digital work environment. Right. Because if you read the work environment law, the legislation there clearly states that the employer is responsible for your work environment, and that involves the digital work environment as well. So why then, if we're assessing the physical and social and organizational work environment, we should assess the digital work environment. The problem is that these safety inspectors, they don't have the skills of analyzing your digital work environment. So therefore, we came up with, or others as well have come up with, this concept of doing work environment rounds. And to be able to do that, you need not only somebody having the safety inspector skills, but you need also to have somebody with IT skills that come in. And usually when you do these protection rounds, you need to have a manager that has the authority to make decisions upon what's happening. So you go out and you do inspections of people's work situation. And the interesting thing, which is different to traditional UX work, is that if you do a UX evaluation, you typically look at one system. But the majority of the problems that people perceive is between the systems. It's that you can't sort of, you have different formats of the personal identification number in the two different systems. So you can't even copy from one to the other and things like that. And if you could then track all of these problems, so we do these inspection rounds and we track all of these problems, and then just to make it quick now, then we go through and we categorize and prioritize these problems, and then we create designs on how should these be solved. And in the majority of cases, it's not that they need a new IT system. Sometimes it's a lousy IT system and they need a new one, but in the majority of times they actually need some more education on how they use things, because the functionality they need is there, they just don't know. So they should be taught on this. And we also found that support is really great. We have the best support team that we can have at KTH, for example, and they got really high grades. But the biggest problem is when people do not use the support. Because during the pandemic, people thought that, I have problems with my broadband connection here, but that's semi-private, right? So I can't call my support desk. And they said if only people would have called, we would have helped them, because for them to be able to work in a good fashion and efficiently from home, they need that to work. So we could also help them to get those things to work right. So the biggest problem with support was that people didn't use it in that sense. And then also we discovered that some of the biggest problem that you had wasn't actually a systems problem, an IT systems problem. It was the business processes around it. So it was sort of putting a lot of extra authentication type of thing or signature type of thing on things, and a lot of extra bureaucracy around things, so that we could identify and then come up with a list of these are the measures that needs to be taken and who's in charge of do this and at what time should that be finished. And so we developed this, and I did it and I've also written a scientific paper about it. We did it at a case with the what's that called? The förvaltningsrätten, the court in Gothenburg that we tried this on, and we made a paper out of that. And then this was actually then taken into a Swedish standard. So användbarhetsronden, the usability protection round, is now a Swedish standard and also proposed as an international standard. And I was the first one then trying out this round and the methods and using that, and also could feedback on how that should develop in that sense. So it's a great example of how we can work with digital work environment.
What was it called? Usability standard round, or what was the
usability protection round? Användbarhetsrond.
Yeah. All right. So you think that type of, I mean, it sounds awesome to start with. I think, it's absurd when you hear it that it hasn't happened before. I think of course you need to evaluate from a work environment point of view, also how the digital experience is, and it sounds obvious. And making standards for that is good. But another way is doing regulation and just moving more into regulation space in general. Is that a good way to make companies more digitalized, to make them more able to handle things that thinking about the digital work experience, or what? And then we have all the things with GDPR about using for integration or integrity purposes, or the new upcoming AI Act, and so many ways to do regulation. What do you think about that? When is regulation good to use or potentially bad to use?
So regulations or laws play very different roles in different cultures. Yeah. I mean, in the US, you would typically have this see you in court mentality, where you would sort of sue somebody because you get too many emails or something like that. But in Sweden, we use legislation much more preventive. So you don't want to break legislation. That's sort of the culture of the Swedish people, in a sense. So in that sense, I think that the legislation actually helped usability happen more, because it's clearly stated there that you should have systems that follow ergonomic principles and so forth. That's both in the work environment legislation, but also in the regulation that the Swedish Work Environment Authority has issued. Unfortunately, this is in desperate need of updates, then, because the display directive is the oldest regulation on the Work Environment Authority's list of regulations, so it's in desperate need of being updated. But aside from that, it's a good tool to use to sort of show and enforce that this is important. And it's interesting because over the years you could see trends in what is it that makes things happen. So 20 years ago it was about cost benefit. You needed to show that investments you made in usability made you earn certain amounts of money based on that. So legislation has always played an important role, but not sort of at the forefront of this. In some instances, it's been like when you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with this chaos reports that look upon the likelihood of projects to finish on time and within budget. And it's the American Standish Group that has looked at and has statistics that half of all the projects are significantly delayed and costs about 189% of original budget. And a third of all the projects are cancelled. So it's only about a sixth of all the projects that are finished on time and within budget. And if you look at why they finished on time and within budgets, they've listed the requirements on why. And on top is user-centered. User-centered is one of the
user-centered.
So they've been working with user-centricity or user orientation as one of the requirements. Agile is one of the other on the top of the list, or clear project management roles, and there's a list of different things that play an important role. So there's been different trends in what is it that actually influences why you do things. But now we're in the happy situation where UX is an accepted and respected role that has a natural part in all the development teams. And so now we don't have to work with these always having to argue why this is a necessity and looking at cost benefits and all of these things, but rather find out how can these the work that the UX people do be integrated in a good way into the standard processes you work with. And as I said before, the agile processes, you tend to think that they're good at this, but actually they don't have UX built into them.
Right.
So typically, if you want to do UX work, what do you do in a Scrum project? Well, you usually go to sprint 0. That's where you put all of your design work and do big design up front type of thing, and then you in the actual sprints you do then you don't have time to do any UX work because that's too sort of research oriented in the ways that you do, so you skip it there, and then in the end you go for the definitions of done. When is this done, or when is it done for actually be able to set whether you have met these requirements or not. So it's still tricky to get the UX work into like a Scrum process in this, and the cases I've seen, because I've been also looking into this as a researcher, is that the best way to get a project to work well is if your Scrum Master is a UX person. Then it works really well, I've seen.
I'm so tempted to go into all these kind of roles of agile working, etc. But I don't think we should go there now.
But we can go one aggregate higher, because we have learned different things, like Agile, Scrum, and it comes very much from software engineering, if I put it like that. And then you highlight one key role in a cross-functional team, the UX dimension. Who is doing that? Is that a developer, or we know it can be so much more with psychology and everything. We've had Lydia here from from Google and all that. And then I argue it's the same problem when we start doing real deep learning work or analytical work, where basically we need to explore, we need to hypothesize, we need to have a scientific approach to design, actually to understand the problem and all this. And so here we have, in the different disciplines of now a modern data AI-driven system. John Bosch in Chalmers defines digitalization as data AI software. I love that short, sweet, sort of condensed.
He's a computer scientist.
Yeah, I know that. But you need to put UX in there, I guess. But the core topic here is that here we have different disciplines with a fundamental work cycle. They are slightly different.
Yeah.
And they need to work as one coherent system again, or one coherent way of working. And here I think one of the key things, right? So we have adopted Agile. We have been sold on that sort of thing. But then someone else has been sold on DevOps. And then someone else has been sold on design thinking. And then a third one on service design. And then we have journey design. And it's a mess when I come to a company, and basically all the different disciplines have their jargon, their lingo. And ultimately, let's put the team together and let's work on this system now, where we have a bit of software, a bit of data, a bit of AI, a bit of UX, yada, yada, yada. It is a kind of, when are we going to get to the next point of fitting all this together more coherently?
But basically, I also think that you're missing one of the points in your story here, and that is all of these situations where you live under really lousy conditions, like look at the Stockholm school portals, or look at the medical journals. I was part of this when Horizon Europe was coming to an end, or Horizon 2020 was coming to an end, and we were to formulate the ambitions of Horizon Europe. That is the current one. We were thinking about the missions of the future research, and we were at this big workshop in Brussels where we were discussing, should we aim for eradicating cancer, or getting rid of poverty, or getting a plastic-free North Atlantic, and then somebody said that what about having a mutual medical record in Europe? And then everybody was laughing and saying, no, that's far too difficult problem. We can't have that as our mission.
Eradicate poverty is much easier.
Yeah, exactly. So clearly
it's a funny
there's
but tragic story at once. In some sense.
But isn't that? I mean, like, this is, I think, one of the recurring sort of themes of we have a hard time to. I mean, like, and maybe not Agile Scrum is the answer. Then we need to find a new lingo. We need to find a lingo where all these things fit together.
But I mean, there's fashion in these things as well. So there's new methods coming up and
new names,
and all of a sudden you should work with double diamond and you should work with Kanban, or you should whatever it is that is the one in fashion right now. And amazingly enough, Scrum has been sort of more of a de facto standard for the last 15 years or so in this. But before that, everybody was doing RAP. That was the rational unified process. So it's different fashions, but maybe now it's time for the next process.
Maybe we don't need to read the fundamental understanding of Kanban or like this, but we need to then be humble and empathetic. What does Scrum mean, or how do you define that, or how do you? If I now would argue that we have UX, we have AI, we have software engineering as different disciplines in this cross-functional team, they need to then have some sort of understanding of the same use case life cycle, or when do we do things. So if you said we need design thinking or UX design comes in the ideation stage. So we kind of start becoming more effective or not forgetting stuff. I don't know, very pragmatically, I think this is basic stuff that we should be able to do.
But I think the basic skills that we need to work more with is the skills of collaboration. To respect each other, respect each other's knowledge and skills and disciplines, and learn how to collaborate in an efficient manner in that. And so it's not so much about having sort of the exact skills of every single small item. Those things you could typically learn, but being sort of a good collaborator and a good listener, that's much more difficult.
I love that. I heard some quote from a very senior software engineer, and someone asked him the question about, who is the best software engineer? And he said, well, it's certainly not the person with the deepest knowledge in whatever technology. What I would say the best engineer is the one that can communicate and collaborate.
Yeah.
The one that actually, when I look at some team and then try to see in this team who is the best engineer, it's the one that talks to people. And I think it's very profound to think.
This is another fascinating topic, but I did a lot of research into the intersection between human-computer interaction and software engineering like 20 years ago, and at one point I met with Larry Constantine. I don't know if you have heard about him, but one of the people in the object orientation and use case arena, and I tried to sort of get the feel of what he was thinking, and then he told me, and he said I couldn't quote him on him, but now he's so old, so I think I can do that. He said, well, frankly, it's about keeping the users on an arm-length distance, he said. And he said that the goal of great designs, and I've won design prizes, he said, that's to stay away from the users enough time so that they're positively surprised when they see you, and then you should surprise them when some new fancy designs that they haven't thought about beforehand. And I tried to sort of convince them to work more with UX type of things into this, but he clearly wasn't there. So at that point, and this is in the early 2000s, the software engineers was saying that we need to bridge human-computer interaction and software engineering, but human-computer interaction needs to build 80% of the bridge. That was basically what they said. We won't move in this. And nowadays, I think that the increasing awareness and attention for human-computer interaction and UX have made others realize that this is a serious field. They have skills and knowledge that are not just common sense that we can work with, and we have respect for them, and we've come up with ways of interacting and trusting each other and deliver together in projects. And the respect is mutual. Sometimes when I meet with users, I ask them, when was the last time you told your software developer, what a great system you built, I really loved that. And I've frankly never heard a software developer say that they've had feedback from the users saying this. But when I gave a UX course for the software developers at CSN, the Swedish Study Loan Public Authority, I met with 100 developers and gave them a course on UX. And I made them go out and do field studies of the systems that they had built. And so they visited their case handlers and had a look at that. There was one guy coming back and he was so fascinated, saying, boy, I'm so impressed with how skilled they were at using the really tricky systems that we had built for them. I had no idea that it looked like this. This is so fascinating. And I said, you've never seen a user use your systems
It's like a director
before?
that never saw his film, right?
No, and I no. He said, no, I've never thought of that could be useful to do, but now I've realized I've done that. But tell me one thing. I said, how long time have you been working here? No, it's my 26th year now. And those things make me.
But it's very telling. Scared. It's very telling, right?
It is.
But another scary but a bit tragic quote.
But I post that this is a new dimension in university studies or something like that. That we are working in our different disciplines, but who is working on the tactical discipline, so to speak, to orchestrate, federate, navigate, collaborate, and finding the common lingo that is the glue behind the different disciplines that need to collaborate together. I think this is in itself. It's a layer here, and there's some magic going on in certain teams when they go. When we have all seen amazing agile teams, right? And when they have speed and everything just works. And there's the UX guy, and they're multifaceted, and they make it work, right? And they find their operating model in this singular team, right?
Yeah.
But this stuff, I think this is super hard to get right.
It is, but I think that what we need to work to develop more in the future is to work with people that can develop the culture at organization, because that's today I think that's what kills a lot of good development attempts, that you're sort of faced with a workplace culture that just doesn't appreciate and accept sort of these types of changes that is essential in that sense. You can't take in that you maybe need to train and learn a new system, or you need to adapt the ways that you're working and come up with new ways of working. It's completely different to what it was before.
You're stepping on a toe here.
I know. I'm so tempted as well to I think this was a very profound statement.
This is
as well,
really good what you're saying now, but oh my God, I want to unwrap culture now.
Or should we go there? Or
first of all, the simple question is, is culture something you can work on, or is it the result of something else? So what is culture then?
Could you elaborate more how you think about that?
To me, if you want to develop a culture, you need to work on the mechanisms that forms the culture. So basically, typically a culture is basically the consequence. Someone said, I think it's Hofstede said, culture is just the collective programming of the mind. So which essentially says, well, culture is an outcome based on what is your steering, what is your organization, what is your KPIs, what do you get rewarded for, etc., etc. So basically, if you want to change the culture, you need to look at the fundamental steering incentives, KPIs, organizational structures, and what they are promoting. So the culture is a result. Okay. It's not something that you can go. It's a lagging KPI.
But if you would deconstruct culture,
exactly.
in what constitutes culture, I think that there's a few mechanisms now that the current IT systems have changed in organizations, and one is that we've lost trust. We've lost trust in people. So now with the systems that tracks more or less everything you do, collects data on everything you do and process that and tries to follow up and measure everything. We've sort of gone beyond having the trust in the staff that they are actually professionals and they want to do a good work and deliver the good results. We're rather working with checking things. When I did one of my digital work environment rounds at my university and looking at HR people, I was asking them, how much time would you save if your digital systems worked optimally? And they said, well, I would save about 80% of my working time.
Exactly.
And 80%, I said, well, what's that? Well, we have a system now where I enter information. Then there's somebody else that checks that I've entered the right information. Then there's somebody else that checks that the person who checked this has entered the right information. That's sort of a culture that we've built into this, and this needs to fundamentally change. We need to sort of view the works that we're doing so that we can reduce administrative load and burdens on people and get to the core of what the work actually consists of. So that's one part of the deconstructing the culture of things. The second thing is and this is a good expression in Norwegian that we actually don't have in Swedish, but the best way to translate it into English is to talk about lust. That you really need to grow the passion in why people do things. Most people go to work because they're passionate about something that they deliver within what they do. Very few people go there just to earn their salary. So how can you sort of find and nurture the things that builds this lust in what you're doing, and that I would want to sort of focus more upon in that.
How you develop the passion in people and make them be able to fulfill it in some way.
Yeah.
But I think we're on the same page. Because the argument where I'm sort of my conclusion or my hypothesis of this is like it's quite futile to go out and say now we're going to sit and hold hands and we're going to have a training so you as an individual has better culture, so you shape up, because your culture and your environment is a consequence of how is the leadership driving and fostering passion or promoting passion. How is leadership fostering and promoting innovation or exploration, versus where's your business case, or So basically, we have a lot of different mechanisms, and including our leadership, that in the end has an outcome that becomes the culture that we then live in. So if we want to change culture, it's like if I want to improve my EBIT in my company, it's a result KPI. I need to work on the levers that improves my EBIT. And I would argue culture is the outcome of other levers that you need to work on. And it's this connection to go out and do sort of fluffy culture training and inspire you. Okay, you can shoot some US rockets for a while, but it's a fundamental construct of the organization, which is the steering, the governance, and all this that it matters that you need to change.
But if as we're approaching the end, which I am looking at Anders for here, I'm sort of seeing that the boss that says, now we're going to start the project of changing our culture, that's a failed boss immediately when you start doing that. You need to sort of focus on something different, which means that you're going to change the culture. So I have an example from my previous years as a boss. We had problems with the work environment of our PhD students. And what we did was that we hired a theater company, going back to drama again here. And the theater company, they interviewed the PhD students about their situation. And then they came and we gathered for a day focusing on our PhD education. And we invited the theater company and they played out what they heard in the interviews.
Oh, so interesting.
and everybody was laughing and saying, you can't do it like that. And then they played that out. And then they rewind it and were to play it again, and then they say, now you should say stop when we do something bad. And then they had a few sentences, and then somebody said stop. No, I would never say that. I think you should say like that instead. And then they said, okay, come and show us. And people were invited to participate with the actors and trying to play out these kind of things. And it was the best ever cultural change experience that we've had in my organization at the time. And we could clearly measure the outcome of that afterwards, because people were thinking about their supervision situation because they lived it. So you cannot come and say that this, now we're going to change the culture in this. You need to have other ways of sort of sneaking in that type of focus on what you're doing. That's when you can create change. And I thought that could be a wrap up to where we started with the drama thing on this as well.
Also, yes, and I'm struggling a bit here in finding some final topics. We haven't even moved into more societal kind of topics here.
Time ran out.
But I think at least one of them, because I think you have such an interesting background with psychology as well, and drama and theater and rhetorics and everything. And anyway, we had this kind of Google engineer at one point that said, a person or a system at Google, Lambda, became conscious. And it would be just fun to hear your thoughts about this, as having an expertise in psychology as well. Do you think there are possibilities for machines to become conscious?
I think I saw you wanted to ask that question, so I was thinking a bit extra upon that previously. I don't think that systems will develop conscious as we know it, because we're not rational.
As humans, yeah.
Humans are not rational, but systems are, in a sense. But then with increasing complexity, it may be more and more difficult to see the rationality. So I think that we will perceive that the system has consciousness, but actually it's some sort of rational packaging of what has been done underneath there. And the question is, how far do you need to go before people start approaching the systems and speaking to them or interacting with them as if they had consciousness?
Don't you do that already with cars or whatnot?
Yeah.
Right.
Of course you do. And I mean, you have a lot of also these films, the movies that try to explore different ways of looking into this. But I think that eventually all systems will be sort of man-made, rational in a sense, even though it's AI that may have sort of constructed parts of it. It's still a human being sometime that constructed the AI that constructed this. So eventually you would be able to track down this to some sort of algorithm that had been created to do this. But you come to a point where the transparency of those algorithms or your ability to deduce what caused the machine to make that decision becomes sort of clouded in a lot of other things. But still, I believe that it is a rational system behind it, but people are not rational. So that's the difference.
Don't you think there are irrational machines or computers or AI systems out there?
No, I don't think so, because that's the definition of a machine, right? That it has been constructed in that sense. So I'm not tempted to go in that direction. That I think where the machines would have created some sort of own the irrationality of what we're doing. Even if you introduce randomness of various forms into what they're doing, I'm not there on that page yet. But
so what's the difference?
I can be wrong, of course.
Yeah. But if you think we can have different type of logic, if we speak about that, so you can have like deductive logic, saying it's 100% sure given the premises that are true, or you can have more more inductive logic, where most of the things you have seen turns out that you've seen 100 birds coming out from the forest, all being green, therefore all birds are green. Kind of inductive logic, or deductive being humans die. Anders is a human, therefore Anders will die. I mean, it's deductive logic. And then you have abductive logic saying, basically anything that has not proven to be wrong could be true. Saying, what could be a good example of this? No one has proven that God does not exist, therefore he does exist. Or that could be some kind of abductive logic that a lot of humans, some people, psychologists, I've heard, claim that 80% of the reasoning that humans do is irrational, and it's type of this abductive logic. But wouldn't it be easy to make a system that behaves in an abductive way?
But then you've created it.
But doesn't humans create humans as well?
Well, I think that basically when you create a machine to do these kind of things, there is... You have made decisions, and you have made decisions into what should happen in various ways. And even if you introduce a lot of randomness and so forth, there is a creator behind that, and I think that that's the difference in a sense. But I may be wrong. I think that basically we think that things are developing very fast, and for sure they are. I mean, the mistake we do sometimes, I'm invited to do talks and they want me to predict what will the world be in 20 years from now, and then most people do the mistake of saying, well, if we want to understand what happens in 20 years, we need to think 20 years before. What did it look like?
It's not linear.
No, it's not exactly. It's not linear. So then you need to sort of look 80 years back and see that the exponential development in that sense. But then in a lot of the things where I'm involved, I see that the development is not as quick as you may think they are in that aspect. I have a classical picture I show of the first field study I did in the 90s, and then I went back to the same workplace to look at it 20 years later and how it had developed, and there's not much difference. Actually, the screens even look quite similar. The two big differences is that the screen has become flat,
and it's not green anymore. It's it's not dark; it's light.
The other difference is that the number of colors of the post-it notes that they put around the screen has increased. But so therefore, I think that we think that things are developing much more quicker than they actually are in that sense, and I think that in many senses, this the development that we're talking about, we can have predictions about it, because I don't think that we will be there to actually see that happen.
You don't think a singularity or some kind of more general type of intelligence will happen in your lifetime?
No, I don't think so.
But I think one way, when I listen carefully to what you said, so I could reframe the question: when do you think we will have machines where the human will perceive consciousness? That means like that I'm talking to the machine in such a way, so I can perceive it as sort of being a very fluent conversation,
but that we have already, right? So
in some areas.
Yeah,
so I think that's the difference, right? Because the question was, is it real consciousness? And we said no. It's not, illogical, irrational. It's designed for some purpose. Yeah. Can we make that design so it's human-like? For sure, But that's not the question. That wasn't the question. So perceived consciousness that is sort of on par with a normal conversation with any human, that is doable. But it's that real consciousness? That's the core question. Am I getting you right?
Yeah. I mean, we could probably sort of bend this back and forth and many times, and I mean, if you read like Max Tegmark's book and the Life 3.0 or various of these, you could sort of clearly see that we are already now at the stage where the human being could question whether they're talking to a machine or to another human being. So in that sense, we're already there, right, on that. But I mean that from the perception of it to whether it is actually real in that sense, real autonomy or real intelligence that has been created in that sense, I think that's very far away.
But can it be proven even? When can we prove that something is a perception and when something is real? How do we prove that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. No?
If it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
It's probably a duck. Oh, I love it. That's maybe a good summary.
Yeah, I think we should okay, I'll stop there as well. Gulan, I was
you were going to say Jan, but we should use Gulan.
Gulan. What's next in your life? What's happening professionally, privately? Anything special happening in coming weeks, months?
What's happening in the coming weeks, times? I'm gonna go on a conference on Saturday down to Aalborg, the Nordic Human-Computer Interaction Conference that I actually took part in.
Is it in Norway? Or?
It's now this year. It's in Aarhus in Denmark.
Do you know Annette Kolmos?
Yes, I met her.
She worked in KTH before,
yeah,
right?
a very long time ago, but before I started.
Before you started.
Yeah, exactly. No, so that's gonna be awesome. I mean, I was part of starting that conference in 2000 and was the first chair of it. So I love going back there and seeing and of all the achievements I've done, I think that maybe starting such an event that still exists.
Awesome. What's the name of the conference?
It's called Nordicai. So
Nordicai.
So CHI is the computer human interaction, the big conference, and we made a Nordic one in 2000, and it's still running every second year in one of the Nordic countries. So that's going to be a great time to meet with colleagues and friends from the Nordic countries. So I'm looking very much forward to that.
Fantastic. Sounds great.
Then I'm going to go directly from there to our summer house and on the west coast and go lobster.
Where is this?
It's in northern Bohuslän, outside of Grebbestad.
Grebbestad.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anyone that you would recommend for us to have on the podcast? Someone that you would like to listen to?
I actually think you should talk to my wife.
Okay, yes.
I think they're doing really interesting work on trying to rethink the HR business in the tech sector and looking into new ways of doing sort of talent acquisition and developing.
This is brilliant talent. Because
we haven't really had much recruitment.
No, but we have talked about one of the biggest challenges if we want to evolve in Sweden is the talent. Is the talent pool there, and how can we think about that? So it's a very super relevant angle on AI and tech.
But of course, I mean, you've had lots of interesting names there, but I'm sort of missing the core science people and like Danica Kragic or Fredrik Heinz or Emil Lutfi or
Heinz we had, but I would love also. I'm the techie person here or science person, so I'd love to have more people.
Yeah, like and also the ones working on it from the humanistic side.
Right.
Dignam in Umeå, for example, is really
that's on the list as well.
Interesting and cool people that has a lot of great insights into it. But then, I mean, it would also be interesting to listen to some of the policymakers around this. I think that Åsa Zetterberg, if you haven't met with her.
We actually had her, I think, in the beginning as well, Åsa Zetterberg, right?
Not Åsa. I think her name has come up, but I can't remember if Åsa was actually here.
It's interesting because for a short time, Sweden has this role of a CEO of Sweden or CIO of Sweden, and she had that role, and I think it was too bad that they didn't continue with such
It's
a
a cool concept.
It is. And
it is a cool idea.
It clearly she showed that there was a necessity for such a role and something that could be further developed and explored. And she's a great person. So I think that you...
No, we haven't had... I'm pretty sure.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But she's usually involved in a lot of these kind of... Yeah. Anyway.
Gulan.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So much more to talk about.
Of course.
So many untouched topics as well, by the way.
Can come back a second time.
If you want to.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Gulan.
Thank you.
Have a nice night. Bye-bye.